Grab your cup of coffee. Sit down for a story. Let's all go exploring. Making it after 40. Making it after 40. Making it after 40.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Making It After 40 podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Rodriguez. I'm an actor and writer who is still trying to make it after the age of 40. On this show, we explore what it means to be an artist trying to make it as a middle-aged person. As you may have noticed, my podcast drops have become more sporadic. I am doing my best to stay on top of things, but between some incredibly long work hours, a couple of road trips, and illnesses, I just haven't been able to stay consistent the way that I used to. But I haven't given up. I will continue to post as I am able. The reality is that this is the thing that is feeding my creative soul these days. And I am so blown away by each guest that I have on. I know the episodes have been fewer, but have you listened to how amazing and insightful my last few guests have been? I feel so incredibly lucky, and I'm going to say it, I feel blessed to be able to have these people on my show and have these conversations on this show with these people. I know what I'm getting out of it. I hope that you all are getting something out of it too. I know it's been a long 6 months between all the strikes, and now with the SAG and the ratification of the agreement, all the questions and everything is up in the air. Things haven't been easy as artists for a lot of us. So I hope that this kind of gives you a little lift if you've been feeling down. It really has been a lot of ups and downs. And although I don't make my primary income from acting or from writing, I feel it because it's what I want my primary income to be. It's where I want to be making money. It's where I want to be telling stories. And all of this has raised a lot of questions for me. Not to get all down, guys. I hope that doesn't take you down. It's just being realistic and being honest, which is a lot of what this podcast is about, is sharing with you all my personal journey to an extent and my own insights and making myself vulnerable. A lot of my guests make themselves vulnerable and share a lot of themselves. And I like to do the same because I feel like that's like an act of good faith, I'm asking them to put themselves out there. So I'll put myself out there. And yeah, it's been a little bit up and down, but I'm figuring it out. With all that in mind, and because this is such a passion project for me, I'm going to keep going, even if that means I have to do it every other week or once a month, whatever it looks like. Maybe I'll take a break for a full month again. I don't know. But I do know that my intent is to continue to produce these episodes. My intent is to do it every other week at the very least, but also give myself grace when I realize that I am not Superwoman and I can't do everything and I can't be everywhere all at once. So sometimes I have to protect my own energy to be able to be a good person for the people who are in my life on a daily basis. I'm sure you all can relate to that a little bit. Okay. This week's guest is another inspiring, incredible woman, Emily Barth Isler. Emily is a novelist and a journalist. Her creative career started with acting as a child, but eventually she found her way to her true passion, which is writing. Emily has made a wonderful career for herself, writing about sustainable beauty for major magazines, including Vogue and Allure. And over the pandemic, she released her first novel, AfterMath, which is a huge hit in the middle grade genre and among math teachers, as she's an interesting little tool, I guess I'll say, in the book that at the beginning of each chapter, she includes a little equation. So if you've got a little budding mathematician in your household, this might be a good book for them. Also, Emily's next book, The Color of Sound, is available now for pre-order. So after you listen, please follow the links in the show notes to order The Color of Sound for your middle schooler. And with that, I'm just going to let you guys pop in and listen to Emily and I, and you'll get to hear her whole story. It's a really good one. So enjoy the show. Well, the other thing that I run into is I will start like remembering people by their social media name instead of their actual name.
Too. Yes.
So like there's this actress, her real name is Danielle Pinnock or Pincock, I can't remember, but I always think Body Courage. That's her name, Body Courage. Like, no,
really
she
funny.
has an actual name.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so my guest today is Emily Barth Isler. And Emily is an author, former actress. You were a child actress, and specifically young adult, but you also write for the sustainable beauty market, I guess I'll say. And you have a lot of like mom stuff out there that I was taking a look at. Yeah. Yes. But
it's
specifically,
funny. I feel like a lot less mom stuff now that my kids are getting older. Like there was a very safe anonymity and sort of vaguely writing about them or about my experience as their mom when they were babies. And now that they are tweens, I am trying to figure out my evolving relationship with, I certainly like never want to mine their childhoods for content or, no shade to people who do have sort of content platforms that are dependent on that, but that's not how my family's relationship works. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
But it is such a challenge. Like I find that too, like even sometimes I'll talk about my oldest on the podcast and I think like, okay, is this something that he would be okay with me sharing? And
and we're all navigating that because we are really the first generation of parents who had social media established before we had children, most of us.
Yes.
And then it evolved as they were growing up. And I just think there's I don't know how to phrase it, but like my identity as a mom used to be sort of generic at the beginning because they were babies. And now it's very specifically not just about being a mom, but being a mom to these people, these specific people. Yeah. And so it's changed how I feel about writing about them because it's not just, breastfeeding is harder than I thought, or giving birth. One of the essays that you probably saw that people comment on most of the time is about being a type A person, but delivering both of my kids 2 weeks late and feeling the pressure of not delivering a project on time when I said, obviously, I'm mostly being silly because we all understand we don't have control, but that feeling especially as a first-time mom. A second-time mom, I was like, everybody, just so you know, it's going to be 2 weeks late. So just everybody chill. But the first time to be like, no, they gave me a due date and I want to hit that deadline. Like that's what I'm known for. I turn things in ahead of time. And, so those things that were more about me. And I feel like now my experience as a parent has so much more to do with who my specific children are. And thus it's really not about me anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it of course.
I think that's a really good way to put it. Put it. I also like find myself doing less of in the beginning, whenever I would meet someone who's like becoming a new mom, I would be like, oh, let me tell you all the horror stories because nobody ever told me. And I was unprepared for the pain and for the discomfort and for the challenges.
And the feeling of failure of doing the most basic things. Yeah. No one told me that.
Yeah. But now I've kind of eased off of that. And I kind of like, instead of just like dumping on people, which was what I was doing, I try to like take their temperature, like, hey, can I share this with you?
Right. Or it's nice to make yourself available and be like, hey, if you ever have trouble with X, Y, and Z, I went through that and I'm happy to tell you my stories. And then they can come to you and be like, wait a minute, is breastfeeding hard? And you're like, oh my God, yes, or whatever, I think I'm similarly learning the like more elegant ways to let those things unfold as I get further from it. But, at the time, I think we're all just like looking for company in our trauma too. And universal connection. And like, there is a lot of trauma dumping and involved in parenthood, I think, because we were not prepared for how hard it was going to be in some ways.
Yeah.
I think because by and large, our parents' generation was very stoic about it, and it wasn't acceptable to talk as openly about the hard things. And so a lot of people just sort of buried it or shoved it down, and mental health wasn't as much in the conversation. And so then when our generation started coming of age and having children, all of a sudden we were like, wait, how come nobody talked about how hard this is, or what this aspect of how hard it is? And I hope it'll be different for our kids and for future generations. And, you know, I'm always clear with my kids, like, parenthood has been challenging for me because of the society we live in that doesn't support parents adequately, not because of you guys specifically as humans, you know, and and because we had a pandemic in the middle of their childhood and all that stuff, you know, like there've been some challenges.
I think that's a really good point, because I think, so I have a 13-year-old and I have a 4-year-old, and the 13-year-old has said things to me like, man, being a parent is hard. Like, this is like, he's witnessing what I'm going through in raising a baby up to like the age that he has seen.
That must be interesting, because your younger child, he's old enough that he has some perspective in watching your younger child. Whereas my kids were both, you know, toddlers at the same time. You know, they're 4 years apart, but they were enough in the same zone that neither of them was able to really watch the other person go through it with any kind of hindsight.
Yeah, because they were in it. They were in the mix.
Right, they were little. Yeah.
For a period of time, he was like, I don't want to have kids. It's too hard. But I don't know. I think he's, you know, he's 13.
I think that's pretty normal too for like tweens to say, and probably really healthy. Probably okay.
Yeah.
You know, he's not chomping at the bit. That's fine.
Speaking of tweens and middle school, your book, AfterMath, is meant for middle school children
and their middle-aged parents and teachers. Yes. I'll take it.
Who should read it along with them.
Right.
I want to get into the book, but I also want to hear about like your artist journey and how you came to going from doing storytelling, you know, in the sense of acting, and then switching to storytelling in the sense of writing. Would you share with us?
Yes, it's so much more of a common story than I think I realized initially, of so many people who had been on stage or on screen transition to writing at some point. We were just talking about my friend Amanda Dybert did your podcast a couple months ago, and similar story of she was an actress first and then transitioned to writing. So I do think this is a thing that a lot of people who are creative, you know, whether it's specifically the acting to writing pipeline, or if it's more of an evolution in terms of trying on some different kinds of storytelling. For me, I got into acting as a child. You know, I was 5 when I did my first professional show, and pretty much all the way through, like from the time I was 5 until I went away to college at 18, I was almost always in a professional production outside of school.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, doing dinner theater or regional theater, or, you know, I grew up in the Baltimore, Washington area. So in a way, I was going to say luckily, I mean, I think in a way that sort of kept my career capped at a certain level. It wasn't LA or New York, which in some ways really afforded me the opportunity to try to have it all, of like having a normal kid life, but also having this theater life. And I was lucky. My professional theater experiences were just overwhelmingly positive, and the adults that I worked with were lovely and supportive, and my parents were very careful about what jobs I took and what jobs I didn't take, and you know, sort of vetting the communities that I would be a part of. But still inherent in that, there was a lot of sort of leading a double life and code switching kind of going on. And I always wanted to be a writer. You know, I was a kid who was always reading a book. And my dad is a retired journalist, and his dad was a journalist. And so I had these beautiful examples in my life of people making a living as writers. And it felt very possible to me, to the point where I was kind of like, oh, that'll be my fallback career. Like, if I don't make it as an actor, I'll just be a writer. Like, as if, I mean, that's so cute, as if that's any more stable. But I did have examples. I know, but I did have examples in my life of people doing that for a living. I never imagined that I would do anything close to journalism, which is ironic, of course, because my work in beauty writing has gotten more and more journalistic as I have gotten more involved in the aspects of it that are sort of investigative in terms of like, where do our beauty products come from? How are the ingredients sourced? How do they affect the planet? How do they affect people's health?
Yeah.
Who's sourcing them? Are they fairly compensated? Who's selling them? Who's benefiting from, the whole beauty industrial complex? But
Yeah.
so of course I've become a journalist because we all become our parents in some way. But I always really wanted to write fiction for kids. And I just never stopped wanting to do that.
Yeah.
But in a way, that felt a lot more scary and vulnerable to me than acting. Obviously, because I had been acting and singing since I was a teeny tiny child, there was some comfort in that and some identity. But to be totally honest, I went away to college and was kind of like, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, I don't want to be on stage. Like, it's interesting when you start a career as a 5-year-old, you're literally partially baked. And how do you know what you're going to want or how it's going to feel? How do your parents know? We're all just kind of making it up as we go. And I think I very much came to figure out by the time I was a teenager that, I loved the storytelling. I loved being part of a cast and a community, but that I wasn't necessarily one of those kids who was like, I have to be on stage. However, I got to college and felt really lost and sort of got sucked back into it because it felt familiar. And I was like, I literally didn't know how else to make friends or interact with people. That was all I had ever done.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of kept putting off pursuing professional writing because that felt really scary to me. It felt very vulnerable. Acting, you're literally pretending to be somebody else. And writing, you're very much, even if you're writing other characters, you are very much putting yourself out there. Like, there's something, even though writers are probably more anonymous or were before the internet, there was something very vulnerable feeling about writing to me. So I put it off for a really long time. And then sort of the same thing happened. I graduated college and I was like, I'm done acting. I don't want to do that anymore. Moved to New York with my then boyfriend, who's my now husband. And once again was like, felt kind of lost and didn't know what to do with myself and fell right back into acting because it was sort of the thing I'd always done. And
it's the habit.
It's the habit. It's the, I know how this system works kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of my reasons for doing it were, I don't mean to, corrupt is such a rough word, but like the reasons behind what I thought I loved about acting were not fully based in a broad sense of reality and how the world works, because I started when I was 5 and so much of my identity had always been tied up in it. And, I just kept on wanting to prove to people that I could continue doing it. And yet, particularly as an adult, I really did not enjoy it. And once you add in, when I was a child, I got paid to act, but that meant nothing to me. I was in a very lucky, privileged position where my parents were not depending on my income to supplement their income or anything like that. Like, nobody was benefiting from the money. It all went in a college fund, and I ended up, I spent it on college. But as I became an adult, all of a sudden this thing that I had loved that was such a part of my identity became tied up in like, how do I pay the rent? And it took on a very different tenor to me. And I did have some quote unquote success. I don't know if success is like one of those tricky words. We could define it any million number of ways. But I had enough success as an actor that I didn't always need another job. And that kept me sort of in the system because you have enough success to keep you going. And even though there was a big part of me that was like, I don't think I want to do this anymore, I had a recurring part, a very small but very stable recurring part on a soap opera, ironically playing a diner waitress, which kept me from needing to wait tables in real life to stay financially afloat. And it sort of continued, just perpetuated this system. I know I'm going to write a memoir someday called I'm Not a Waitress, but I Play One on TV. Yeah, so that it was sort of a funny thing, all a long way to say, because this podcast is about making it after 40, that I didn't get serious about identifying or pursuing my true career goals until my late 20s, early 30s. And there have been a lot of times where I sort of look back and regret that and wish that I had started writing seriously and professionally a lot sooner. But on the other hand, I do think, I feel like the way I would have approached it in my 20s and early 30s would have led, the way I approached everything then would have led to some burnout that I'd be feeling now. And so I do have some gratitude that I had a slower, later start in what I think of as my true profession. Because, I mean, burnout wasn't a word or a thing when I was 18, but by the time I got to college, I was burnt out.
Yeah.
You know, I think I experienced my first round of burnout so much sooner than a lot of my peers because I started working sooner than a lot of my peers. And I think had I jumped from college into a writing career directly, I would have just burnt out again. And instead I got to burn out on acting, which was something I knew deep down I didn't really want to pursue. And I got to like go through that whole experience of being like, you know, just like really running it into the ground and being like, this is not making me happy. And and then I got to sort of, you know, rise again like a phoenix and start over, you know, really mostly in my 30s, like 30, 31. And I'm grateful for that. Like there's a part of me that wouldn't trade it for earlier success. I also think, you know, quote unquote success, again, like what does that mean? It means something different to absolutely everyone.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to talk about,
we'll get to that question.
Yeah, I know we're going to talk about what that means, but I think had I been successful at writing a lot sooner, when I was less fully formed or, you know, sort of realized and, figured out like what I really wanted and who I really was, like, I don't know, I might have been on a really different path. So I hate when people say that everything happens for a reason, because I don't think that's true, but I do think we can make meaning out of the way things happen. And I do think there's a lot of good that came out of me being a career late bloomer.
I do see that being a common thing with a lot of people, myself included, is, you know, kind of like needing to go through those experiences and develop and grow more before you can really kind of figure out what it is that you actually want. And, you know, I think probably I wonder if you getting to get burnt out on acting kind of helped you to like know for sure that you were done, or that like, I don't know if there's maybe you kind of needed that permission to give yourself like, yeah, no, I gave it my best shot and I really don't want to do it. I feel good walking away from it.
I used to always say when I was an actor, and I wish I had, again, this is like a different time. We're talking early 2000s. This was in an era, I remember as an actor bringing up with people that I also wanted to be a writer. And this was pre-Tina Fey, pre-Amy Poehler, all of these people, these multi-hyphenates. And so many acting coaches telling me, no, you got to stay in your lane. You got to show them that you want to be an actor. If you tell people you want to be a writer, they'll write you off as an actor. You know, you got to like pick a lane. You have to get in a box. I mean, when I think about it now, it is wild how different it was. And like, I mean, talk about things steeped in patriarchy that we didn't even realize that, you know, this idea of like, if you wanted to be an actor, like I literally had an acting coach tell me to try and act dumber because I came off as too smart, and people on sets were going to be threatened by how smart I was, and to like dumb it down.
Oh, wow.
Which now, like, I can't imagine anybody, like, now people appreciate that actors are also intellectuals and multifaceted. Most actors want to also direct or also write or also produce, you know, like now it's not a crime to want to do everything. But I feel like we're talking the age of like Paris Hilton and Jessica Simpson and, you know, these young women who were put into boxes as like, stand still and look pretty, or you know, dance and look pretty,
and who literally did dumb themselves down. And like, and they're very intelligent women,
right? That was the trend then. And so that was one aspect of it that obviously I felt really frustrated about. And so if I could encapsulate that period in my life with like one sort of prevailing thought, it was this idea I kept saying to people, I just want to make it really big for just like one project so that I can quit, so I can walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a good way to go into a career. Like, I literally was always like, oh, if I could just book like, one significant guest star role on a TV show, then I can quit. And it's like, that's not great. And I do think it came through in my auditions and in my work and stuff. Like, I'm an empath. I wear my emotions on my face. I'm not sure that people couldn't tell that my heart wasn't in it. And I was like, I just want to prove it. I also had a very rough experience in my high school with my drama teachers. And it was a very emotionally scarring experience. And I think I also would have quit a lot sooner had I not been trying to prove to them that they didn't keep me from doing it.
Yes.
Again, when we talk about like reasons that are not good reasons to pursue a career, I'd go with proving people wrong is number one. And number two being getting successful once so that you can quit. Yeah. And those were the two things I was going after. And I have to give my husband credit because he figured this out early on and was always encouraging me of like, you are not utilizing your beautiful brain. You are not getting to shine in the way that like, he was always encouraging me. He knew I wanted to be a writer, but also knew, we met in college and I had a lot of like, intellectual verve there that I then sort of let go to be that sort of dumb actress figure that was popular in the beginning of the 2000s. And I give him a lot of credit for supporting me when I felt like I needed to keep going and being loving and patient with me as I figured it out, what he knew from the beginning. But
so go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say like, what a gift to have a person in my life who saw that I wasn't utilizing my strengths and I wasn't living to my fullest potential and I wasn't particularly happy and, whatever, but he let me figure it out and was very kind along the way of being like, I'm here for you, but like, oh gosh, why don't you write that book? Like, what do you, don't you want to do that?
Well, I'm sure that's why he's your husband. He's like someone who's there, who can see who sees you, but also gives you the space to figure it out. I think that's like just a really good partner.
Best person that I know, sort of in a vacuum, like best person, but then also in relation to me, the best partner for me, which is a really special double whammy that not every relationship gets of like, fitting in those two unique ways.
Yeah. So then once you decided to go ahead and focus on writing, how did you get started? Like what kind of, I read on your bio, you talked about like how you took like every creative writing class you could when you were in college.
Yes.
And so once you kind of made that decision to switch, like, was that scary? And like, how did you approach it?
Yeah. And there were about 10 years in between when I took all those creative writing classes. And then when I actually started writing seriously as a profession. So I took all those classes because I thought it was fun and I knew it was something I was good at. And, it's funny to even say that out loud now. I feel like for so long growing up as girls, particularly, I think we were socialized to not say like, that's something I'm really good at. And now I'm trying to get more comfortable owning what I'm good at. And also admitting what I'm not good at. Like I can tell you 15 things I'm not good at if you want, I have no sense of direction, I'm not, whatever. But writing was always something that I was very good at, that came easily to me, that I had a lot of joy in throughout high school and college. I mean, even earlier, like I used to just, sit down with a notebook and just fill it, and write stories and come up with plots and characters. I just always loved that and came really easily to me. So I, took those classes in college because I knew it brought me joy and I was good at it, but I definitely didn't think that I don't know. I guess it's some form of imposter syndrome. I was like, but I'm not like one of those people. I can't just be a writer. Yeah. I was so in a box. I was so in my lane as like, you're an actor, you do this. Yeah. It was hard to see myself as anything else. So I was really lucky to stumble into an acting job when I was around 27, 28. It was the dawn of internet streaming entertainment, but really the dawn in that like I was working for a branded content company that did online short form sitcoms and shows. And, sort of stumbled into this as an actor. And the director was a person who was actively looking for people who could do both. Like he was ahead of his time in so many ways. One being, internet content. Like I remember a friend's mom used to always be like, are you doing pornography? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I was like, no, there are things on the internet that aren't porn. Like it was so early on in the idea of like, people couldn't understand how you would watch a show online. And it's so funny because now that's all we do. But this was the very beginning. And so, the owner, head of this company was looking for people who could act and write.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that. I went to the audition as an actor and he was like, wait a minute, you went to Wesleyan and you majored in, like film studies. Do you write at all? And I was like, oh yeah, that's something I can do. And so I started doing both and it became so obvious very quickly to me that I got so much more joy out of the writing than I did out of the acting. But that was a really hard thing to admit to myself. I'm stubborn and I'm insecure and all of those other things that keep us in our neat boxes. And I'm like avoiding saying something because I know at the end you're going to ask me, I'm a podcast listener. So I know you're going to ask me at the end of like, advice and that kind of stuff. But I'll say it now and I'm going to say it again.
That's okay. You can give the advice now. That's
the
fine.
advice is that it's okay to change your mind. Like changing your mind is not the same as giving up. Like I had this idea that I had to pursue acting until it like literally, I don't know, I guess killed me or like drove me into the ground, or that I got so successful I could walk away. Because again, that was like my goal. When people were like, what kind of acting do you want to do? I'd be like, I don't really care. I just want to get like one successful job so I can quit, which is like insane. Anyway, my advice to people, and the thing I wish I could tell myself, except I know I had to learn it the hard way, is that changing your mind is not the same as like, quote unquote, giving up or not making it or not being good enough. You can change your mind. Like our dreams evolve. And I just couldn't let it go for the longest time. And then I think the moment where I realized I really had to stop acting for real. One of my acting jobs was I was a regular background actor on Saturday Night Live. So I was on the show in the background most weeks for a long time, for a couple years. And just sort of like in the scenes, if they had like a high school class, it was dreamy. I mean, talk about like, I learned so much just being there and it was wonderful. But first of all, they would call you on Thursday and call you in if they needed background. And then I would like say goodbye to my husband until Sunday because you just eat, sleep, work there. I mean, I would come back home and go to sleep, but like crazy hours. It's not a very like work-life balance-y way to live.
No. I hear it's brutal.
So yes, it's not great. Even for the lower ranking, lower paid people. It's not a great job. I mean, it's a cool job, but it's not for people. So this one of these moments where I knew there were actually two moments, and they both had to do with I got pregnant with our first child after a couple of years of really wanting to become parents and working really hard at that. And I was pregnant and, first I got the phone call from my doctor. I'd gone in to like do a blood test to like make sure I was really pregnant or whatever. And I got the phone call that I was indeed pregnant in a waiting room I had an audition to play a 16-year-old on a TV show. And I had this moment where I was like, what am I doing? I am 30 and I'm trying to pretend I'm a 16-year-old and I'm like about to become a mom. Like I'm actually, the nurse called to be like, good news, your blood test came back and you're pregnant, So that was one moment. And then the second was with Saturday Night Live a couple of months later, I like tried to ride it out as long as possible and not tell people that I was pregnant and just wear like baggy clothes, whatever. But then this was around the time that Black Swan came out with Natalie Portman, and she was hosting SNL and they wanted to do a Black Swan parody. Mm-hmm. And they called me and they were like, how do you feel about wearing like a full body leotard on camera and doing a ballet thing? Like, are you comfortable doing that with Natalie Portman? And I was like, oh, I'm 6 months pregnant. I have like a cantaloupe sized bump in my, like, I'm not going to this isn't going to work for your Black Swan parody with Natalie
Yeah.
Portman in a bodysuit. Like, and that was the moment I was like, why am I fighting this? And of course, lots of people work through their pregnancies and into motherhood or whatever. But for me, as somebody who was actively trying to convince herself to have the courage to get out of this business or this aspect of the business, I was like, oh, this is a sign. This is not working anymore. I am literally trying to like fit a round peg into a square hole or whatever, vice versa, whatever that saying is. Like, it just became this point where I realized that it was so ridiculous, not just because I was pregnant, but also because I had been looking to get out. And I was like looking for an excuse or a reason. I was like, oh, here we go. Guess what? I like really can't do this anymore the way that I wanted to, or that I used to want to.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny. Well, then, so then you just started writing your short stories, or did you like, how long did it take you to mastermind this amazing novel?
Well, a couple things happened. So one thing, I'm so lucky. One of my very best friends is a woman named Jordan. And at the time, so once I decided I was not going to be an actor anymore, I did get a job. I was working through a temp agency and just doing like kind of mindless, office-y sort of work. While I tried to figure out how to become a writer, you know, like, because I was like, okay, great. I've got my computer. What do I do? You know? So I was at one of these like boring temp office job kind of things. And Jordan and I started emailing back and forth. We were both really interested in beauty products. And this was, again, it's so funny. I sound so old on this podcast because I've already talked about like the dawn of streaming. And now I'm going to talk about the dawn of blogging. So people were starting, I have a friend who had started a blog. Actually, her name is Lynn Chen. We went to the same college and she lives here in LA. She's a very successful actress and has a couple blogs now and podcasts and, you know, she's just like doing all of it. And she was one of the first people I knew who had a blog called The Actor's Diet. And she was talking about everything she was eating as an actor and blogging about that. And went on to become, to write a lot about, she had an eating disorder and write about her recovery. And, you know, it's very cool to see how her blog evolved over time. But anyway, she was starting this blogging thing and she had told me that people would send her free food because she was writing about it. And so Jordan and I were emailing constantly about, you know, I tried this lipstick. It was really good. It was a little sticky. I didn't like how it smelled, but I liked how, you know, whatever. And then she was like, you know, we're doing this already. We should just put it in a blog. And I was like, oh yeah. And maybe people would send us free stuff. And we started, and lo and behold, it worked kind of like that. You know, we didn't make any money off of it, but we did start getting free products and people would send us stuff. And we very quickly narrowed in on a focus. We were both really interested in organic, natural, you know, women-owned, small batch skincare. And so we found a niche that at the time, I know that sounds crazy now that nobody else was doing it. But at the time we were, you know, some of the first people really to focus on natural skincare and like farm to face, you know, sustainably made. It took off and it was, you know, we would always just sort of write on the blog as if we were emailing each other at our temp jobs in offices, you know, sort of like, really so it took on that tone. And we ended up doing that for a long time. And then we both had our first kids around the same time. And then we both had second kids. And we sort of got to the point where she was like, you know, I think I'm done with the blogging. Like I've had enough. This has been fun, but it isn't for me. And I was like, oh, I love this. I want to keep doing this. And another friend who is, as she likes to call it, a recovering attorney, said to me at that point, oh, you need to stop giving away this beautiful work for free. Like you're just putting it on the internet. Like you need to monetize this. And so I started pitching to magazines at that point. So that's kind of parallel to, you know, I was always working on stories and novels and I kind of had a lot of false starts. I worked for, you know, I really, again, I think it all comes back to college. I reached out to like people I went to college with and somebody knew somebody who knew somebody who was working at a book packager, which is like a intellectual property company where they will come up with ideas and then they'll sell the idea for TV and film, but they'll also sell the book, the idea as a book, and then they'll hire a writer to write it.
Oh.
And I thought, oh, that's a great way to sort of get my feet wet and learn about how publishing works. And so I did that for a year or two, maybe even close to 3 years, just freelance. And it was an incredible experience. Like I really learned, I got to work with amazing editors there who taught me how to plot out a book, how to outline, how to craft a story, how to, just like, I joke that like that was my unofficial master's degree. It was a lot of things I think that I would have gotten out of going to graduate school, but I happened to learn it on the job. And then I got to the point where I decided I was ready to, take off the training wheels and do it on my own, because that job involved a lot of ghostwriting and sort of, it was a great experience, but it's not a long-term experience. At some point you have to sort of, if you want to grow, go any number of different ways. But that helped me learn about publishing and meet some editors and get an agent and all of the things that I would not have known how to do otherwise. So AfterMath was the third complete book that I wrote on my own after leaving the sort of ghostwriting job, which again was freelance. It wasn't even, and it was just trying to figure out how to cobble together. And I had a newborn baby and, all these things happening at the same time.
That's a lot.
The way that they are, I'm like, as I say it, I'm like, I'm making this sound so easy.
No, that's a lot.
So I wrote a couple of books that my agent sent out, and, there were a lot of close calls of people who liked them, but wanted changes and then, lost interest, or, they wanted it, but their boss didn't love it, or their boss loved it, but they weren't, there were a lot of near misses, enough interest to let me know that I was on the right track, to be like, okay, I know I can do this.
Yeah.
And the third book I wrote was the book that eventually became AfterMath. It had a different title at the beginning. It was called Among the Survivors. And I had been writing YA, and AfterMath is technically middle grade. And I didn't start out meaning to write middle grade. It just kind of happened because I visualized the main character. She just kind of popped into my head, and she was 12, and I don't know, the whole system of defining books genre sort of by the age of the main characters is a little bit backwards, because it doesn't always fit into a neat category that way. But anyway, so she was a 12-year-old character, which sort of slotted into middle grade. And but it took, I had 3 different agents with that book. Maybe 2 different agents with that book. So many close calls. It took, I wrote the first draft of it in 2015 and didn't sell it until 2019.
Yeah. When
I sold it, then it didn't come out. It's usually about 2 years between when you sell a book and when it actually comes out. Unless you are Hillary Clinton writing what happened after the election, they're going to fast track that one. But otherwise, it usually takes about 2 years. So, and I think that was a really valuable experience, because with those first 2 books I wrote, it was disappointing to put them in a drawer, but it felt after a while, I had enough near misses and close calls and learned a lot, and was like, okay, I see why this book isn't selling, and I understand, and I'm going to thank it for its service and put it in a drawer. And then when it came to AfterMath, it was the first time where I was like, no, I cannot let this go. I will rewrite it or workshop it or do anything I need to do to keep pushing this book. And part of that is that I had finally figured out that it was important to me to have an activism component with my writing. And for people listening who don't know about the book yet, it takes place, it's not at all about a school shooting, but it takes place 4 years after a school shooting in a town that is full of kids who are trying to, go about their lives and find happiness and joy and meaning and all, pass their math test and hold hands with somebody and do all the teenage things or tween things, having survived this. And, that really came to me because, we've all watched so many mass shootings, and
so many. Yeah.
I've been involved in gun violence prevention pretty much my whole life. My grandfather was a gun violence prevention activist. And so it was just part of me. And when I realized that maybe this was a way to combine some of my interests and contribute to this movement that's so important to me, which is gun control.
Yeah.
It was the first time I realized I couldn't let go of that book. I couldn't put it in a drawer.
Yeah.
So that whole process from writing to publishing was at least 6 years.
That's so crazy that that's
Yeah.
how long it takes. Because I don't think people ever think that it's going to take that long.
No,
Like,
and it's so funny. And
yeah.
everybody thinks, and I did too, I was one of these people. You hear writers say that their first 1 or 2 or 10 novels get put in a drawer and never get published. And I was like, yeah, but not me. Because I think
I
you
could see
have to
that.
have that delusional optimism to keep going. And I thought I had gotten some of that out of the way by doing the ghostwriting I've done for, almost 3 years. I was like, oh, well, maybe
Yeah.
those are my novels in a drawer. Maybe that's what counts for that, and I'm going to skip ahead. But there is no skipping ahead. And some people do
Yeah.
sell their very first novel, and that's great. But the majority of people, there's like actually a meme going around social media right now where writers have written out, and I haven't done this because it's very complex, and I actually have a lot of projects in the works that I am legally not obligated to disclose yet. Or that I legally obligated to not disclose yet. Anyway, but authors are making lists of like all of the books they've written with like color-coded annotations of like, this one went in a drawer, this one went in a drawer, this one went out on sub, but it didn't make it. This one went to my agent, but she didn't send it out. And this one went to a publisher, but they didn't buy it. And then this one I sold, and then this one I didn't sell. And like listing all their projects, which I think is so incredibly beautiful and meaningful. And I just love that we as a society are getting more comfortable talking about how failure is, quote unquote, failure.
Right.
I actually did a school visit this morning at a middle school, and I was talking to them about how a Major League Baseball player, I'm a huge baseball fan, Major League Baseball player is considered to have a great batting average if they're batting over 300, which means their average is for every 10 at bats, they're hitting the ball 3 of those times. That's considered good. And we're all okay with that. And so it took me a long time to be like, this is okay as a writer. I actually am at that point right now where I've written 10 books and I've sold 3 of them. So I'm always reminding myself and other people, I'm batting 300. If I were a Major League Baseball player, I'd be having a great season, even though it feels, sometimes thinking about those stories that are never going to see the light of day, or that haven't seen the light of day yet, or that aren't quite right, or all the work I poured into them, all of the heart that I've given those projects can be very, very disappointing. But when I think of it in terms of, my batting average is great.
Yeah.
And then, when more and more authors are talking openly about all the rejection, and I think I also thought that once you sold one book, it would be so easy to sell another. And of course, that's not true, because it's like you're starting over every time. Although I will say it has gotten easier. I am now in a place where I have good relationships with several editors who like my work, and we can brainstorm, and I can pitch directly to them, and they can help me formulate ideas that they think are going to sell. Like I am in a huge place of advantage, but it's not the magic key that I thought it was going to be.
Do you feel like also that now that you have AfterMath, which has done so well and has been so recognized, like you kind of like, the more you do it, the more you start to figure out like what your formula is that kind of like produces the results that you want?
Yes and no. I mean, it's funny because I'm changing and growing, and the industry is constantly changing and growing, and of like what's hot in the industry, like any creative field that has business at the base of it, just like film or television or music or whatever.
Yeah.
Somebody might become successful, and then the industry wants more from them, or wants more from the genre. And, there are these sort of peaks and valleys of trends, and everybody's chasing trends. So in some ways it's not as clear cut a trajectory as I would have liked. And also my 3rd book has been announced, and it's a picture book, which is a whole different kind of writing and a whole different kind of publishing. It means, I get to collaborate.
That's the Color.
Oh, no, The Color of Sound is my next novel that's coming out in March. And then in 2026, which feels really far away, I have a picture book coming out called Always Enough Love. And I'm really excited about that. You know, that's a whole different style of writing and marketing and publishing and, you know, collaborating with the illustrator and like all these different facets of it. So in the best way possible, there's always something new to learn or to master, to grow. And, you know, my confidence as a writer is always changing. You know, The Color of Sound is a much more ambitious story, I think, in some ways than Aftermath. It's there's time travel, there's, you know, intergenerational family trauma, there's, you know, music and synesthesia, neurodiversity. You know, there's all these elements. Like, it's a much more complex story in a way than Aftermath. But I'm also learning Aftermath. I love that book. I mean, it's my first baby. I love everything about it. I loved the experience. But because it deals with a subject that's so loaded and divisive for our country, I do think that my time publishing, you know, my time since it was published, my time of sort of marketing it and talking about it has been full of highs and lows that are really unique because of the subject matter. Like, it has gotten me indoors. You know, I have gotten opportunities that I think I wouldn't have gotten if I'd written about a quote unquote safer topic. You know, I've gotten to be on panels and talk to people and advocate and do fundraisers. And I mean, it's been incredibly rewarding. But on the other hand, I've also faced a lot of, you know, people who are just like, absolutely no, we don't want to talk about it. Like, oh, it involves gun violence? No, pass. Like, there's just a lot of people who write the book off before they've read it. So I'm very excited about the process of, you know, sharing The Color of Sound with kids and parents and teachers and educators. It is a much more easy sell in terms of, oh, it's about mother-daughter relationships and this girl who's, you know, neurodivergent and her experience as a musical prodigy, but also, you know, meeting her mom as a 12-year-old. When, you know, she's 12, she gets to meet her mom when her mom was her age. There's this sort of time travel element. It has all of these elements that are a lot easier. They're more palatable for people than, oh yeah, we're going to talk about the sad state of America post-gun violence in small towns. It's like, oh, okay, that's hard. And I don't regret it, and I wouldn't change a thing, but I'm excited now that I see how different it's going to be. I'm like, oh, yay, let's do this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I also think like an interesting component about Aftermath is that you literally include math in the book. And I was reading about it. I haven't read your book, but I did read that at the beginning of every chapter you include an equation, which I think is you took so many different elements for kids to explore of grief and different ways and many different ways of grieving, along with like math and, you know, being in new environments and just being 12, and that's hard.
Well, and what I have found shocking and funny too, I love math, but there are almost as many people who say to me, oh yeah, no, I don't want to read a book or give my kid a book about that talks about gun violence in any way. Almost as many people have said to me, oh, I hate math. I don't want to read a book that has to do with math. So I was like, wow, I didn't realize I picked two polarizing topics. Like, I had no idea that math was going to be almost as much a barrier to entry as gun violence is. Like, of course, it's not quite the same. And teachers really appreciate it. And I was very lucky to be honored by the National Council of Teachers of English and the National Council of Teachers of Math, and given this award called the Mathical Book Prize, which is exactly what it sounds like, of like books that, you know, heavily involve math in the themes and the plots. And, you know, there's definitely a place for that. But sometimes when I'm at, you know, a big book fair or event or something, you know, I see a lot of the parents coming by and, you know, it's always the kids pick up the book and they're so excited because kids, they know about school shootings. They know about gun violence in America. And they're morbidly curious in the way that, you know, I always make the comparison that when I was a child and a teenager, I was morbidly curious about cancer because before I was born, both my grandfather and my uncle both died of cancer. And it became this thing that we didn't really talk about in my house, but there was a big empty hole in my family. And as soon as I was old enough to look for books in the library by myself, I went and found every book about people dying of cancer that I could find, and I read all of those books.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I thought that Aftermath would fill a need. And certainly for kids and for teachers, it has. Like, there is an appetite. I think kids growing up in this world, they recognize some of our bigger problems like climate change, gun control, war, things like that. And they're hungry for information about it because their parents are often hesitant to talk about it because it's scary. And also, our generation didn't grow up with active shooter drills, regular school shootings, things like that. And so a lot of parents who are my age are like, oh, no, my kid doesn't want to talk about that. But the kids are like, they've never known a world where this wasn't part of their reality. And it's not that it makes it any less horrible, but they're a lot more comfortable talking about it than their parents are. So it's just been interesting to sort of like watch that process. I'll be at a book fair and the kid will come up, pick up the book and be like, oh, I want this. And the parent will pick it up and look at it and be like, oh, school shooting? Ooh, no. And, that ends up really sort of being the barrier. The parent is the person who has the money, who's going to buy the book or not. Yeah. But teachers and librarians have been just overwhelmingly supportive and loving of the book. And, pretty much every teacher I talk to is like, oh, I have, at least one student or a class or a group of kids. Like, I know the person who needs this book. And that's such a good feeling when you see that there isn't need that this book is filling, and that kids are feeling less alone because an adult is talking about this thing that has either made them anxious or that they're curious about, or this concept, not even just school shootings, but, loss and grief. After the pandemic, like, I don't know anybody who doesn't have at least a friend of a friend who lost somebody important to them in the pandemic. I think grief is a more pressing and relevant topic than ever. And, grief also, I've learned that our society has such a narrow definition of grief. People hear that word and think it just means death. And I've written about and learned about the fact that there are so many things we grieve. Like, the pandemic was the best example. I felt so much grief during the pandemic of the opportunities my kids were missing out on, the normalcy of going to school, the normalcy of not wearing a mask at school. Those things, we grieve those things, those are losses too. So, I definitely think obviously there's a place for the book. I'm so glad it's out in the world. It continues, sadly, to be incredibly relevant and necessary, but I'm also excited that my next book is like possibly more broadly appealing.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on that before we started recording too, with your next book, the generational trauma aspect. So I think it's really neat that you are able to incorporate so much of the things that you experience and that you that are important to you into your writing and into your art. And I think that's honestly what makes good art, is like when it's like really means something to you, is like it translates onto the page or onto the screen or onto the stage or whatever.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I always say to people who ask, how do you decide what to write about? And this is often aspiring aspiring writers who are like, I don't know what I want my book to be about. I don't know. I have so many ideas. How do I pick one? And I say, write the story that you can't not write. Like, write the thing that is so present in your head that you can't stop thinking about it. That's how you decide. And that, like you said, I think is what makes good art. Is it's the thing that keeps you up at night, or that you keep turning over and over in your mind because you don't have a good answer at first, and you're writing the book to try and figure it out. And I was really cognizant when writing it of, I didn't want either of these books or any of my books to be therapy for me, therapeutic for, right. But on the other hand, if it's something I'm struggling with and I can distill it into a more universal theme, that probably means that other people are struggling with it or want to talk about it or process it or read it. And so I do think there's an element of art that, if it is cathartic and helpful to the artist to get it on the page or on the canvas or on the screen, that it will automatically resonate with other people because it's a pressing issue, like, yeah. And, what I used to think of as being kind of self-serving is now I understand outwardly serving, like if it's something that's hard for you or emotional for you or really like needs to be said, then there's an audience for that probably.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also like, I think exactly what you said is that it's of service, because the reality is the books that you're writing, with Aftermath, that might help some kids get through something, and like maybe they can then find the courage to talk to their parents about it. With the
Yeah.
next book that you're writing, who knows? Like, if
Yeah, I
like
love
people are
to.
doing a book club, it
Yes.
stimulates the
I love
conversation.
to call my books, and I mean, and all books, I think, are conversation starters at their best. They're maybe not the answers, but they're the questions. They are the thing
Yeah.
that starts the discussion, and maybe my readers will figure out how to solve gun violence and war and intergenerational trauma and like whatever. I don't know,
Yeah.
but what I can do is start those conversations. And
Yeah.
another thing that I learned through doing Aftermath and promoting it and talking about it was so meaningful to me that the book is about something so much bigger than myself. And it was easier for me to get online every day and beg people to buy the book because it was part of a movement, and I donated a portion of proceeds. I still continue to. A portion of all the money I make off of Aftermath, I donate to a smattering of gun violence organizations, both big and small, that
Yeah.
I think are doing meaningful work in the gun violence prevention sphere. And that has been so empowering to me to be able to say, like, don't just buy this book because it's great and because I worked hard on it and because it's well written, or whatever number of things I hope people feel about it, but buy this because it's part of a bigger mission. And we all can feel so small and so powerless sometimes, and
Yeah.
I've gotten to see and experience firsthand how art can be like so powerful and so
Yeah.
connective, and so much bigger than just us. And I think honestly that's something that I wouldn't have thought to do in my 20s or early 30s. I think that's something
Yeah.
that, making it after 40 is like the wisdom to understand that, for me, my art needed to be bigger than just the art. It needed to be about something. That's the
Yeah.
difference between being 40 and being 20 or 30.
Well, what do you look forward to as you continue to grow in your career and grow as a writer and grow in
Oh,
age?
so much. I mean, despite the state of the world, like if we can put that aside,
Ugh,
I
it's
am,
so hard
which,
right now.
is
Yeah.
just a
Yeah. We
constant.
can put that
Yeah.
aside.
So let's put that aside for a second. I'm so optimistic and excited about getting older and working more. And, my kids are getting older. And they're at a point, they're getting more and more independent, but they're also getting to be more
Yeah.
and more, we can have these like great conversations and watch the same TV shows together. They're no longer watching Bluey. It's like we can all watch The Good Place together.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things just about life in general that I'm like, oh, this is getting fun. And I think that way about my work too, where I'm getting over, I don't know, like I don't care anymore what people think of me as much. I've
Yes.
heard so
Yeah.
many of your guests have said this, and it's like,
It's so true
however you
though.
want to call it, like the fucking fuck it 40s or fucking 40s or
Yeah.
whatever.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
no fucks 40s, or I hope we can curse on this show. I hope that's okay.
Yeah. It's fine.
But just like I do not care anymore what people think about me or my choices. Like obviously I care what people think about my work in terms of they don't have to love it, but I obviously like I hope it's meaningful to some people. But I have
Yeah.
gotten over wanting it to be meaningful to everybody and made peace with the fact that like it's going to resonate with some people and other people are going to not get it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It'll find the people that need it.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. It will find its intended audience, and
I've had that experience too. I mean, even my aunt, like when I had gone through one of my pregnancy losses, she sent me this book. She was like, "Hey, I've been there. This book, I think, will resonate with you." So like
oh, that's
it
so
finds its way to the
nice.
people.
Right. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's a long game. I think I've learned that too, is that, my view of what success looked like. And I feel like this is one of the questions I know you often ask people, but like my view of success used to be like quick and huge, you know, and now my idea of success is so much more slow building and kind of meandering, and this just totally unexpected path. I think one of the things I look forward to about my career is embracing the surprises. Like, I have gotten to do things and go places and write things that I would never have imagined. Like, I can, you know, put my dreams out into the universe and be like, I want to do this. But then I've also gotten to do things I didn't even know to ask the universe for. And that's so cool. Like, every day I wake up and I'm like, ooh, what exciting thing is going to happen today? Either things I've, you know, seeds I've planted, or seeds that the wind has carried into my garden that are going to grow. And like, I didn't even know they were coming. You know, there's just like, I have really embraced kind of the unknown in a way that my 20 and 30-year-old self is like, what, the unpredictable, like, what? So I'm sort of learning to like take control of the things I can control and really let go of some of the other nonsense. And it's just beautiful. I know that other people have said this on the podcast, and you know, we all keep saying it because it's so true, but to me, aging is just such a privilege. Like, and I think I have a unique perspective on it too, as somebody who has written a lot in the beauty industry. And I've written for Allure magazine and Oprah magazine, Organic Spa, a lot of these magazines that at least used to, and sometimes still talk so much about anti-aging and staying young and keeping. And I have come to see that like, that is a fool's game, trying to stay young. Like, that's not a thing, because if you're not growing, you're stopping. And obviously like, the alternative to aging is not living. Like, if we are going to keep living, we have to get older. And it's just like, when did we stop celebrating? You know, my kids, it's like every birthday is such a major milestone, and they're so excited. And it's like, at what age did we all decide that we were going to change the rules and like not? I mean, and I get it intellectually.
I think it's 35.
Yes, no. I get it. Like, I understand aging is scary because it, you know, we have mortality and everything, but I also think that's what makes life so beautiful. And so, you know, and like, I've learned so much. I'm so excited to take my wisdom into the next step. And, you know, I know, and also like, none of us is guaranteed anything. And that's a beautiful sort of freeing thing of like, oh, I'm going to take that shot because who knows what's happening tomorrow. So there's a freedom in letting go a little bit too.
Yeah. Leonora talked about on her episode how she's so excited to get to be like the matriarch, to get to be like the mentor to the next generation. Totally. And I think that's another really special thing about aging, right?
Yes.
Like, getting to like help usher other people into whatever it is they're
I agree. And like, to not fear what the new generations are going to bring to the table, but to embrace it and be like, how can I help? Like, let's get this out there. I think there is a big shift around how we're thinking about aging and, you know, growing. And as people are, you know, knock on wood, living longer lives, we have to rethink what it means to be 40, what it means to be middle age. What is middle age? What does it mean to, you know, like, I love how people are talking more openly now about menopause and different stages of life, the freedom that brings, the different pros and cons. And, you know, it's in some ways, I think a lot of people are still stuck in the mentality of a time when people, you know, retired at 65 and kind of faded away and weren't heard from again. And, you know, that we're in a very different place in the world, and people overall are living longer and are, you know, living not just longer, but better, healthier, you know, again, knock on wood, like, may we all be so lucky. But I, you know, I do have moments of panic of like, oh, I want to write 1 million books. How am I going to get that done in the time I have? You know, there's that great line in Hamilton of, you know, why do you write like you're running out of time? And I relate to that so much. I always feel like I'm in such a rush for everything to happen because I want it so badly. But when I can take a moment and step back and look at how beautiful that is, that I'm full of drive and inspiration. And, you know, I write like I'm running out of time because we all are all the time, not just in terms of our mortality, but just in terms of this moment of like, writing a book is like capturing a moment in time. And,
Yeah.
so is taking a picture. So is composing a symphony, any kind of art is capturing whatever that moment is for the person creating the art and the people interacting with the art. And we're always running out of time. And if we're lucky, there's more. But
Yeah.
I feel this urgency, and every so often I think, oh, why didn't I start writing books when I was 20? And then I think, I don't know, but it is what it is. Like, what am I going to do? Go back in time?
You
That's
don't
not
have
an
a time
option.
machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's, we're just,
Although your next book does.
yeah, kind of. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sort
I mean,
of.
and
It has the time
yeah,
travel.
and I think that's kind of why, why I wanted to explore that too, of like,
Yeah.
time is sort of nebulous and circuitous in terms of the way that memory and, art makes us immortal, right? Like you
Yeah.
can return to that art and it's transportative, and so much of that is true in because we now have like digital archives of every day of our lives through the emails and the texts and the podcasts and all the things that we create. Like, it's more and more possible to sort of revisit a moment in time. I like my phone cycles through these pictures of my kids. I just put it on like random cycle, and it just pulls up pictures from when my kids were little, and 4 years ago and 10 years ago and 7 years ago, and just all
Yeah.
random. And it's sort of like I'm revisiting all of those moments. And if you can embrace that and try and enjoy that ride, it's so much
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. That's all really beautiful stuff.
Well, thanks. I
I
spent a lot of time thinking about what time is and what shape it is, and that's all in this next book. So
Yeah. So what made you want to go into writing novels rather than doing screenplays? One might think that because of your background coming from acting that you would have gone towards like screenwriting
yes.
or plays or
And it
TV or
definitely
something.
occurred to me, and I definitely tried. But I will say, I tried like when I was in middle school. I had this really wonderful teacher named Mr. Sullivan, and he inspired
Mhm.
the teacher character in Aftermath. For anyone who's read that, he and another teacher, Mr. Ebersol, who was my math teacher in high school. Those two teachers really inspired that character. But Mr. Sullivan in middle school encouraged me to write a play, because he was like, you spend all this time being in plays, you must understand the structure and the all that. Like, let's see what you can do. And I wrote a play, and we put it up at school, and then I entered it in a contest, and it won, and a professional group put on my play. I got to go see it, and
Oh, wow.
that was really cool. And then I don't know. And then I was like 14, 15 and insecure and more focused on being on stage and all that stuff. And so then when I went to college, my intention was to study screenwriting. And,
Uh-huh.
I went to film school at Wesleyan in Connecticut. And my intention really was to go into screenwriting. And, in I think the very first sort of intro to film 101 class that I took was this ginormous survey class, and we watched it was the history of world cinema, and the way it was in the fall was part 2 and in the spring was part 1, so you sort of it's backwards, and you sort of jump in
Okay.
and post 1940 or whatever. I don't remember what the cutoff was, but so we were watching the great films of like Hitchcock and God, my brain is a sieve, and I'm trying to remember the other famous, but this example happened with Hitchcock, and we were doing a unit on him and really diving into his whole oeuvre, and talking a lot about the overarching themes and the continuities between his different works, and what was he, whatever. And I remember figuring out, this was before the Internet Movie Database, but I remember figuring out that Hitchcock did not write most of his scripts. He directed them, but he was not the writer. And so in this huge survey class of a couple hundred students, I remember like hesitantly raising my hand and asking the teacher, well, what about the person who wrote the script? Like, you're talking about this as if, you're talking about Hitchcock's worldview and his point of view and what is he saying in this movie. But what about the person
Yeah.
who wrote it? And there was just like this chorus of laughter of people. And the teacher was like, yeah, filmmaking is a director's medium. Like, it's not a writer's medium. Now, again, I think that has changed to some degree. I think there's
Yeah.
room for everybody. But it was
Yeah.
a moment where I really realized that if I wanted to sort of, you know, have more control over the final output of a story, I was like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
well, that's not going to happen in film unless I want to be a director. And I knew I had no interest in directing. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but from day one, I was just like, oh, directing, no, too much responsibility. You know, like, and it's
Too much
funny
work.
because I'm a type A person and I am very organized on top of it. And I like being in control, but for some reason, I don't have that urge to direct. I'm not a visual person. You know, we spent several semesters studying, you know, framing and, you know, like sort of composition of shots and all that stuff. And I was just like, I don't know, there's a thing in the upper left-hand corner. You know, I'm not a visual artist. That became very clear. So, you know, that was one of those formative moments where I realized that the kind of writing I wanted to do was not going to be served in this particular medium.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. And
that's
books were
a good answer.
books are my enduring love. Like, I don't know. I just have always loved books. And so the idea of, I've written a couple screenplays because I live in LA and it's like, I don't know, you feel like you have to. And so like, I wrote a Hallmark holiday movie that has yet to find its way out into the world, but it was, you know, more just sort of for fun and everything. And it was great, but I missed the part of writing where I get to tell the story, the visual part of the story with words, as opposed to in a script where you sort of have to leave that to the director and the actors and the crew and the lighting, and they get to tell that part of the story later. And so I guess the short answer to your question is I'm a control freak, and novels give me the most opportunity to control every aspect of the story and ensure that at the end it looks exactly how I want it to look.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, that's good. I like that.
I don't know what that says about my collaboration and cooperation, but, you know, take from that what you may. I just really like to be the director of my story in writing.
Nothing wrong with that. Yeah. That's great. I find that part of the reason I wanted to ask is because, like, I know for me, like, whenever I want to write something, I think in terms of screenplay. And I know oftentimes people say, like, oh, you want to make sure you control the rights, write the novel, then write the screenplay based on the novel. But I'm like, I don't know, like a novel seems so daunting.
It's so funny. People say that. And of course it's just whatever, you know, because the idea of being in a writer's room or trying to sell a screenplay or anything like that feels daunting to me, but it's all just, it's because it's the things that we haven't done or it's the way your brain works or doesn't work. And I love writing novels because I like to be alone in my creative process. And it gives me the most sort of solitude while writing. And then I have a wonderful agent. I have a wonderful editor. So many people put their creativity into the project before it's finished. But there is really a lot of alone time when it's just me and my computer and the characters. And I get to just literally make shit up. And I'm just not sure that I would shine as much in a more collaborative, you know, sort of writer's roomy kind of thing. I'd like to think I'm congenial and, you know, kind and thoughtful and all that. And like, of course I can get along with people, but it's just the way that my storytelling brain works is like, I actually really crave being alone. I think the older I get, the more I realize I am actually an introvert in so many ways. Or actually what I just learned it's called is an ambivert, which is like, there are pieces of me that are extroverted and there are pieces of me that are introverted. And my creative self is very introverted. And like, I like to work alone, which is so weird. It goes against like so many other, you know, the actor part of me is like, you can't act alone. You know, I guess you can do a one-person show, but even then, you know, you've got a stage manager, a director, and a lighting person, you've got an audience, and you've got, you know, whatever. And as it turns out, the piece of me that likes to tell stories really likes to do it solo.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean, you've got to know yourself. You've got to know like what works best for you. So I think that's really
And
neat.
that's part of the process of like, making it after 40, I think, is like we finally know
Yeah.
ourselves if we're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I'm definitely going to take a piece away from this conversation, in that like the thing that I've been really wrestling with is with acting, and like what you were talking about, like, am I just holding on to it because like I just want to prove that I can do it, that I'm worthy,
Oh,
that, like I need that outside validation,
yes, it's
right?
so hard.
Um, and so like lately, I don't know, like a lot of things have shifted for me, and I've done like a lot of hypno coaching. I'm gonna have Grace, her name is Grace. I'm gonna have her on the podcast too,
Oh,
and she
cool.
really helps like with my
Does she do a podcast or a?
Yes.
Oh, I've
Yeah, yeah,
totally
yeah, yeah.
listened to her podcast during the
Yeah, she
pandemic.
was on Leonora's, she was on
Oh,
Mothering
okay,
Heights.
yes.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
some point during the pandemic, when I was just so like full of despair and loneliness, I feel like I tried pretty much everything out there via podcast and
Yeah.
like hypnotherapy and meditation
Yeah.
and anything. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. She helped me so much with like a bunch of subconscious stuff. And I don't know, like I feel like I might be ready to let it go. Like, and just let it be like what it is, like in
Yeah,
terms of just like it's just for fun now. It's just for like if I want
yeah,
to do some community theater,
yeah.
then I
Bringing
can
sort
go
of
do
the
that. You know
joy
what I
back.
mean? Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think I might be ready to let go of the idea of doing it professionally.
Interesting. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's really brave and exciting, and I you know, obviously did that with acting, and honestly
Yeah.
I have not had one moment where I missed it or regretted it.
Yeah.
And I've even had opportunities where friends have been like, "Hey, will you do this thing with me?" And I'm just like, I don't even want to anymore. Like I just don't even have the
Yeah.
drive, which is so weird because it was such a big part of my life, and I don't regret
Yeah.
it. And I'm nowhere near ready to give up writing, but I have hit the point where I've started to think very carefully about the intersection of art and commerce and how the business
Oh,
side of it affects the art side of it. And I'm very cognizant
yeah.
of that and constantly sort of working on that, of like wanting to feel that freedom of writing a book that's not under contract, that's where it's just about the joy of writing it and you don't know what's going to happen, versus
Yeah.
now when I sit down to try and write something, I can't help but think, well, is it marketable? Is it going to sell? Has somebody else done it? Is it
Uh-huh.
universal enough? Is it whatever? And that's necessary, but it's also a bummer. It
Yeah.
really like takes some of the joy out. And so one thing I'm working on now is really finding spaces to sort of give time to each of those facets of writing, to make sure that what I'm writing is marketable, because not just because like take the financial part out of it, but because also what the commercial commerce part of it does is it gets you the audience. And I've learned that there is something
Yeah.
really important about the audience part of a story. I remember my husband and I talked about this a lot when I started writing novels, and he was like, isn't it just enough for you to write a book and like know that you've done it, write it for yourself?
Right.
And I didn't have a good answer for that. It took me a long time to figure out that no, I think part of writing a book for me is then having other people read it, and that conversation, the dialogue that happens between the writer and the
Yeah.
audience. And I think it's
Yeah.
like completing the art cycle, And I think
Yeah.
without that, there's a piece of it missing, and the art is a conversation. And then the next book I write is part of that conversation. And then the book I write after that is a continuation of that conversation. And
Yeah.
so I think in that way, there is something really important about paying attention to what is commercial, what is going to sell, and what is going to see the light of day. But to a point, I'm
Yeah.
not trying to write the next Harry Potter. It's problematic in so many ways, but like I'm not trying to write the next Percy Jackson or the next Dogman or anything, because that
Yeah.
level of commercial, nobody knows how to do that. If there were a formula, we'd all be best-selling authors. That's
Yes.
just magic that happens sometimes, timing and magic. So I think there's a way to sort of keep the commercial part of it in perspective and, you know, give it the amount of attention it deserves, but nothing more. And like, it's enough just to sell it and know that there's an audience out there, and it may be a smaller audience. It doesn't have to be universal to the entire world, but it has to be sellable enough that someone's going to read it. And so finding that balance is really helpful in terms of that intersection of art and commerce, where I've been struggling a little bit in terms of like wanting to find the pure joy sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that also, like, just understanding that there's like some sort of intersection and that there's a balance also comes with age. I remember like being in my 20s thinking like, oh, like commercials are garbage and this
Selling
and that. And it's like,
out
yeah, but
and-
also, yeah, you're selling
Right.
out, you know, like I was a theater major, right? I was doing avant-garde theater and stuff. And so it's like, and then you come to realize like as an adult, but you know, what's also nice is having income and being able to like not stress every single moment about where you're going to have money for your next meal or like
totally. Well, and
knowing
I
that you
think
can have your kids.
also
And
there's a reason why more commercial art is mass appealing versus like the sort of the more indie avant-garde stuff. There's definitely a place for both, but like there's a big joy about creating art that is, you know, like pleasurable to a huge number of people as opposed to 10 people in the West Village on a Tuesday night in a small theater that definitely has rats, you know, like that's a niche and that's great. But like there is something really beautiful about appealing to a larger audience because it just means more people are going to get it. And, you know, it's.
Yeah. And those people need some art too.
Right.
And it may not look the same way that the art that you want, but like those people need some art in their lives. And whether that's like a Marvel movie because it takes them out of their stressful day or like whatever's going on, or if it's like, you know, like some sort of like heavy indie film or like
It's
rom-com,
all
The
part of
Notebook, whatever.
that conversation that goes on between the art and the audience or the artist and the audience. And no matter how big or how small that conversation is, it's very valid. And yeah, I think, and if that conversation happens to also make enough money that we can live, I mean, I would love to return to the times when, you know, very wealthy people would sponsor, you know, in the Renaissance, like, you know, like people were patrons of the arts because that's what you did. And that's why that time was like so fruitful for music and art and architecture and stuff. Cause like the way people flexed their wealth was by sponsoring artists. And I would love to do that and never have to worry about how much money a book is going to make or not. And is it, you know, am I making a living or whatever? But it's the world we live in right now. We live in a capitalist society. I'd love to see it dismantled, but I'm not personally going to be the person who gets that done within the next 10 to 15 minutes, you know? So it's like, given that we live in a capitalist society, how do we also make a living as artists? Like, that has to be part of the equation. That's just inherently part of, like, otherwise it's a hobby. Otherwise, like, you gotta be making some money off of it. Yeah. Or you say, I'm going to do this for fun and it's going to live over here in the hobby category. And that's great too.
Yeah. No, that's totally great.
There's something so freeing about that. Like that actually sounds really fun. I have a lot of friends that I did theater with in high school and, you know, when I was younger, professionally, whatever, who now do community theater for fun in addition to whatever their other jobs are. And I'm like, that's so cool. Like, good for them. That's, you know, and then they don't have to worry, like, is this job the right job to take for my career? It's like, oh, someone's doing Fiddler on the Roof. That sounds fun. You know, like, cool.
Yeah. I actually, my sister-in-law, she did a production up in, I can't remember if she did it when she was in the Central Coast or if she was still up in San Jose, but it was like, they did Oklahoma, and like the people who perform in it, they're like so talented. There's no reason why they wouldn't be on Broadway other than they decided that they wanted a steady income.
Yes.
And then they do these like amazing, like well-funded productions.
Yes, well, I grew up doing that in the
during
summer.
The day they're accountants or whatever.
Well, in the summer, I grew up doing summer theater in the area where I grew up. And it was a lot of people who either used to be professional actors or could have been professionals. And instead it was actually like a huge community of people who had gone into teaching for the steady income. And so they had the summer time off, and they would put on these absolutely phenomenal performances, these shows that were the same caliber as a lot of regional theater, Broadway, that kind of stuff. But they were people who had decided, you know, they had families to support or whatever, or they loved teaching and they wanted to do that too. And they found a way to band together and become this group of like, hey, let's do like a really amazing summer theater. And then, you know, we'll spend the rest of the year teaching or whatever. And it created this very cool environment where that was also a great example set for me that there is a way to do it just for the joy that's not about making it, you know, are you going to make rent with this show, you know?
Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get to the final. You kind of already answered it.
Well, but just maybe I can think of
making it after
other answers.
So what does making it mean to you now versus when you were younger? So what does success look like to you now?
Oh gosh. I mean, it's so much more moment to moment, and it's really just about like, God, I was about to say inner peace, and that sounds so floofy and woo-woo, but it's about just feeling like I've done everything that I want to try within the realm of like whatever is possible, healthy, safe, you know, feasible and responsible. Like, I don't know. I think I said that before, that like success in my mind used to be like big and bold. Like the word itself used to just take up so much space. And now it's like this smaller piece of a much more complete picture. It's like one element, and it's just so much more about, like, honestly, any success that would take me away from my family more than one weeknight a week wouldn't be worth it to me, you know? Any kind of success that it wouldn't involve excessive travel and being away from my kids, any kind of success, you know, like the things that I used to think sounded fun. Now I'm like, success is something that lets me pick my kids up from school and be around in the afternoon and watch TV with them and my husband in the evening and cook dinner and put the kids to bed, you know, like that's part of success. And obviously I didn't think of that in my 20s. I had no idea what that was going to look like, but you know, success is a much more well-rounded visual now. And it's really also, it's just more about like, am I able to be kind? Am I able to be helpful, of service? Am I able to like do something that's meaningful to other people? You know, and it's also, that's really about time too. Like, you know, there's nothing wrong with being a stockbroker and like making a shit ton of money, but like, I don't think I would consider that success anymore, because it would mean having so much less time with my family, with my friends, with myself. Reading, writing, you know, swimming laps is like my great joy. And success is having a job that allows me to do that during the day, you know, like that's it.
Yeah. Sounds good to me. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Emily, it's been such a joy getting to chat with you.
You too. This is so fun.
I'm so glad you reached out.
Oh, thanks. I'm a big fan. I reached out because I was like, oh, I love this podcast. And, you know.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. That's so exciting. I love that. Well, it's been so great talking to you. Oh, and people, they can get AfterMath out wherever. It's obviously been out since 2021.
Yes, anywhere books are sold. And then my next book just went live on pre-order yesterday. So you can now...
Oh my gosh, this is perfect timing.
Exactly. So if you're listening to this, you can pre-order my next book, The Color of Sound, anywhere books are sold. So, you know, Amazon, bookshop.org, your local indie, Barnes and Noble, Target, Kmart, it's absolutely everywhere books are sold. You can pre-order it, and pre-orders are so important because it signals to the publishing industry what there's an interest for, and then they print more and then they push it more. And so it's this ridiculous dance we do to try and get people to pre-order our books, but it is the way the business is structured. So if you're listening to this and you think that down the road you might want to read the book, please pre-order it. Or equally as helpful, and it costs you nothing, is you can request the book at your local library and say, please order this book. And actually, you're basically asking your library to pre-order it. Equally helpful, because either way, you're telling the industrial complex that there's an interest. So I appreciate every pre-order, mention, retweet, whatever, book publishing, especially at the sort of level and age group that I do it for. It's such a grassroots organization, and I'm so grateful. Literally every time I hear that somebody that I don't know or who's not related to me has read my books, I'm just like, what? Like, it never gets old. I'm still shocked and delighted when if somebody is like, oh yeah, I read that. I'm like, oh, thank you. So please just know, if you're out there and you pre-order the book, like, I'm literally doing a happy dance. So I appreciate it.
I feel the same way every time I meet someone and I'm meeting them for the first time. I'm like, oh, I've listened to your podcast.
Yes.
Like I met, it was a friend of a friend who had been on the podcast, and I met their friend. I was talking to them and they were like, somehow the podcast came up. They're like, I knew your voice sounded familiar.
It's
like,
the best.
I listened to your podcast.
It's the best. Yeah. It's wild.
I was like, really? Oh my gosh. That's so, you just feel so special because it's like not your friend. Or
totally.
And you a little pat on the back.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like somehow they were metabolizing your art without you even being there. And you're like, really?
Yeah.
You can like interact with me when I'm not there. It's like, there's another example of something that feels like time travel. Like, somebody out there right now is reading AfterMath, and like, I'm not even part of it anymore.
Well, we'll include links to your website and your Instagram so people can find it. And all that. So make sure you order Emily's book. You pre-order Emily's book. Thank you again, Emily.
Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, I'm so happy to chat, and let's do it again.
Yes, definitely. Thank you all for listening to this week's episode. You can follow Emily on Instagram at Emily Barth Isler. Be sure to buy her book AfterMath wherever you buy books, but more importantly, pre-order The Color of Sound, which will be available starting March 2024. All these links are in the show notes, including a link to her website, which has everything as well. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen. And please be sure to share the show with your friends. Word of mouth is the best marketing, as you know. Be sure to follow the show on Instagram at Making It After 40, the number 40. And to catch up on what I'm doing when I'm not podcasting, check out my Instagram at Lisa Rodriguez. Thank you all for listening, and have an excellent week.